Hey everyone, NecroVMX here, and time for another review of a SNES RPG that is a bit off the beaten path for most people, and I played through it for the first time on Twitch. This time, we're talking about Lagoon. Unlike the first two games I covered, Lagoon was actually released in the United States, though it was a rather unsuccessful game. I would see it referenced, but I never saw it or played it until recently. Lagoon is an action RPG that actually was first released for the Japanese gaming PC, the X68000, and then later was ported to the SNES. Lagoon is a pretty blatant ripoff of the East series with an almost identical look and presentation, though replacing the bumping mechanic from East 1, 2, and 4, the ones that it has the most in common with the ability to actually swing your sword. Lagoon is one of those games that I'd heard mostly disparaging things about, but of course I need to find out for myself how bad or perhaps how underrated the game might be, and form my own opinion. The developer, Zoom, wasn't exactly known for a lot of RPGs. They mostly made shooters for the X68000 and the subsequent SNES ports. For example, that game Phalanx? The one with the infamous box art with the banjo guy? Yeah, they made that. The publisher Kemco would wind up having many more years of publishing mediocre to bad RPGs, so pray for Mojo. Lagoon never got a sequel, and Zoom, as far as I know, never made another RPG, sticking mostly to action or sports titles since then. So here we go, I'm rating Lagoon on a scale from 1 to 10 in the following categories: graphics and presentation, music and sound effects, story and writing, gameplay and controls, and balance and difficulty. And as usual, the obligatory reminder that on a scale from 1 to 10, 5 is average, not unplayable. People who do that are doing it wrong, mostly because they're copying professional reviewers who skew scores high to please video game publishers to get them to buy ads on their website or, back in the day, in their magazine. So yeah. For graphics and presentation, there's no getting around it. Lagoon is simplistic looking and kind of ugly. The main character looks like a brown lump at times, and most NPCs look exactly the same, so differently colored lumps, though at least the lump changes color when you change your armor in this. Enemies look a bit better with some interesting designs, and the locations are fine. But yeah, this game isn't going to win any graphical awards. I cut it a little bit of slack as the X68000 version came out in 1990 and the SNES port came out next year in 1991, so this is pretty early SNES, but comparing it to other games of the year such as Final Fantasy IV and Brandish, this doesn't hold up. The presentation is great with a nice layout, it's easy to understand menus, the icons, and holy crap, they really just stole it all from Ys. Seriously. If you were to compare the HUD of Lagoon to the HUD of Ys, it's a wonder that Nihon Falcom didn't outright sue Zoom for blatant copying. Everything, from the way the inventory is handled, to the on-screen HUD, to the way the game handles dialogue, it's all stolen wholesale from Ys. So while yeah, Lagoon has great presentation, it's only because it copies it from a better game. For graphics and presentation, I give Lagoon a 4. For music and sound effects, we have a mixed bag here. There's not a whole lot of songs, mostly because it's a very short game. They're not super memorable, but they're also not bad. The sound effects are actually kind of irritating at times, especially the sound of hitting an enemy with your sword. So yeah, for the most part, the game doesn't actually do anything really amazing with sound, but at least you get some good tunes as you wander around for the short amount of time that you're playing it. Now, the biggest issue that I had with sound was that there's no audio indication of when you gain a level. You can literally level up, and there's no sound effect. You won't know that you've leveled up unless you happen to notice that your life bar is longer, or you look at the menu. This isn't game-breaking by any means, but I found it to be a really, really silly thing. Literally any sound effect would have helped. I'm going to be a little lenient here. For music and sound effects, I give Lagoon a 6. For story and writing, someone in my chat once proclaimed that Lagoon is a game where nothing happens. Well, that's not entirely true. Things happen, but they seem to happen with no rhyme or reason, and you just go from location to location. At its heart, there's a plot about polluted water and a floating castle, two divine brothers separated at birth, but for the most part, Lagoon isn't a game that you're going to play through for its story or its writing. It has a workmanlike excuse plot that isn't egregiously bad, nor does it stand out in any way, shape, or form. Occasionally, there's a somewhat interesting character, but that's about it. Both the story and the writing are thoroughly below average, so I'm going to give Lagoon a 4 for story and writing. For gameplay and controls, Lagoon is once again a mixed bag. The game controls pretty much like how you'd expect an Ys clone to control, though it is slow and clunky when comparing it to the TurboGrafx Ys games, and comparing it to its Super Famicom cousin Ys 4 Mask of the Sun, while that game felt a bit stiff, it was still faster moving. Unlike those Ys games, you do press a button to swing your sword, which is a nice change of pace, but the issue is that Nasir's sword is about as long as a toothpick. And it's not just the sprite, the hurt box really is that small. And with Nasir being such a large sprite, it's very difficult to damage enemies with the sword without also taking damage. The good news is that you can rely on magic to attack enemies from afar, and the magic is plentiful once you get it, and you can kind of make your own spells by mixing two different equips together to make a spell, which is a really neat touch. It's fun to experiment with the different magic elements and attack styles. The bad news is you can't use magic at all against bosses, and some of them require pinpoint precision to damage them without taking damage yourself. And that's something the game isn't great at doing. The game also ends in a boss gauntlet, which means no magic, that most of games of this type end in, so saving your best healing items is a good idea, and at least unlike most Ys games, you can access the menu while you're in a boss battle. Lagoon also lets you jump, and this is pretty cool, though the game has some jumping platform parts where falling is instant death, and it's not always easy enough to judge your jumps, since Nasir is kind of floaty. Also, like in Ys, you can stand still to heal, which works nicely, especially since enemies don't actually respawn in this game like they do in Ys. Overall, Lagoon plays fine, and it's the most fun when you can shoot enemies with magic, but the toothpick-sized sword is a real issue for boss battles. For gameplay and controls, I give Lagoon a 6. Finally, for balance and difficulty, the game is pretty much as you'd expect from a game that apes everything from Ys. It's hard, but it's not too hard. If you run into a battle that you can't win, sometimes only gaining a single level makes all the difference, just like in Ys. However, as I discovered in my playthrough, Lagoon also has a devastating programming error that affects how damage is calculated. Rather than just relying on Nasir's stats and his weapon and have that raise when you level or equip a better weapon and maybe putting that up against the enemy's defenses, there's some sort of complicated formula that determines your damage based on your level in relation to the enemy's level. This can mean that if you're at the exact right level, or rather the exact wrong level, you can wind up not being able to damage an enemy at all. This means that once I got to a boss I found difficult, I tried to level up. And once I gained a level, I tried again, and I found myself dealing 0 damage to the boss. So I had to level up again to be able to do any damage at all. This kind of flaw thankfully doesn't affect you once you reach the maximum level, but oh my god, imagine if it did. From what I've been told, this is a pretty rare occurrence, and it only impedes progress for a little while if you run into it, but it's a pretty major flaw. Overall, Lagoon skews harder than most action RPGs, but a large part of the difficulty is due to poor design choices, rather than the game giving you a decent challenge, so many of the game's issues probably would have been solved by simply lengthening the character's sword. For balance and difficulty, I give Lagoon a 5. Overall, Lagoon is not a chore to play. It's a game that you can spend some time with and not regret the time that you spent with it. And I'm happy to have gone through it and formed my own opinion, but this is a game that doesn't do anything particularly well. It just plays. It's fine, but it's nothing special. And as far as Ys clones go, you could do better. The average score is exactly 5, a thoroughly middle-of-the-road, non-memorable experience that is as inoffensive and as unremarkable as a plain bowl of oatmeal.